Why personal boundaries are important and how to set them. Personal boundaries are vital but not always easy to establish. Still, with a few helpful steps, setting and communicating boundaries become easier. From childhood, we are often taught to bend and mold ourselves to make others comfortable. Sometimes this messaging is implied, as in school dress code, for instance, and sometimes it is direct. I don't care if you don't want to hug your grandfather, it's rude not to. But the one truth is that it's always there. So it's no wonder some of us find it difficult to set appropriate boundaries as we get older. We don't want to offend or hurt others, even when the avoidance ultimately means hurting ourselves. We have been taught from a young age to put the feelings of others ahead of our own needs, to the point that many of us don't even know the answer to the question, what are the boundaries, let alone set how to set them. Personal boundaries are simply the lines we draw for ourselves in terms of our level of comfort around others. These boundaries may have to do with the physical contact, not feeling comfortable hugging a person you have just met, verbal interactions, not wanting a friend or family member to speak down to you, our own personal space, choosing not to have others in your home when you aren't here. These boundaries typically fall into a few specific categories: emotional, protecting our own emotional well being; physical, protecting our physical space; sexual, protecting our needs and safety sexually; workplace, protecting our ability to do our work without interference or drama; material, protecting our personal belongings; time, protecting the use and misuse of our time. Boundaries can also exist in a variety of situations that includes but not limited to the following: at work, at home, when visiting a family, when out with friends. Healthy boundaries are a key element into your physical, mental, and emotional health. They look different for each person and relationship. Really, anytime you're talking about engaging with others, you are likely got personal boundaries that surround that situation. And finally, personal boundaries don't have to be communicated for them to exist. We all have our lines of discomfort. They are there whether you tell others about them or not. Still, personal boundaries are more likely to be violated if we don't communicate them. That's when the problems may occur. We all have our own personal lines, boundaries we would feel more comfortable navigating life and our relationship with. The thing is, not everyone has the same boundaries, and most people are not capable of guessing what other people's boundaries may be. This is especially true for people who may have lower emotional intelligence, and often they are the people who benefit the most from having personal boundaries clearly communicated to them. Setting boundaries is simply about communicating your needs for healthy interactions to someone else. It isn't always easy. Not everyone may like or understand your boundaries or your reasons for setting them, but if you don't set those boundaries, you certainly can't expect them to be followed. It often takes courage and strength to set boundaries. When you do so, you can feel comfortable knowing your lines have been set, your needs have been communicated, and if someone chooses to violate your boundaries after that, you would be within your rights to create further distance between yourself and that person. No one has the right to tread on your boundaries, but it's good to keep in mind that you likewise don't have the right to tread on someone else. Boundaries can be both physical and emotional. Physical boundaries involve that you are comfortable with regarding personal space. Boundaries are important, but they aren't always easy to establish. People often don't know where to begin or how to communicate their needs to others. If you're looking for a way to set your own personal boundaries, it may be a good idea first to consider what type of boundary you are setting. Now, the number one boundary that you need to set up is emotional boundary. Here are few just examples of what healthy boundaries might look like. Valuing your personal boundaries and not compromising them for someone else. Say no and accepting when others say no. Knowing who you are and what you want and communicating that to others. Engaging in appropriate sharing. Not letting others define you or your sense of self-worth. Knowing that your needs and feelings are just as important as the needs and feelings of others. Knowing that you have the right to your emotions and feelings. Respecting other values, beliefs, and opinions, while knowing that you do not have to compromise your own values, beliefs, and opinions. Regardless of what type of boundary you are talking about, it is important to keep in mind that healthy boundaries are all about you and the other person in the relationship's wants, needs, and limits being honored and respected. It's also important to remember that healthy boundaries take effort and intentionality to implement and maintain. Healthy boundaries can also help prevent relationship abuse by helping relationships understand the difference between what is acceptable versus unacceptable behavior in different types of relationship. What do unhealthy boundaries look like? Some of the examples of unhealthy boundaries may be disrespecting the values, beliefs, and opinions of others when you do not agree with them, saying no or not accepting when others say no, feeling like you are responsible for other people's feeling and or happiness, feeling like you are responsible for fixing or saving others, touching people without their permission, engaging in sexual activity without clear consent from the other person. Emotional boundaries. Emotional boundaries often have to do with how others talk to us and treat us, and they aren't always things we think to set until after a boundary has already been crossed. This is okay though. The best way to set an emotional boundary with that person is to approach them, ask to speak about the argument, own any part you may have played in the argument going, tell them that you are not okay with and that you will need them to engage without stooping to that level in the future. Physical boundaries. Let's say you are not comfortable with shaking hands. While these tends to be a social norm, there are many reasons a person may not be comfortable doing so, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic. The best way to set this boundary is before it even becomes an issue. When you meet someone new, wave from a few feet away. Smile and say, "I don't shake hands, but I'm so glad to meet you." Don't feel the need to apologize or explain yourself beyond that. The same tactic of saying something before a boundary is crossed works for other physical boundaries like not wanting hugs or being touched by someone you don't know. Plus, if someone is in your physical space, consider saying, "I get uncomfortable when people are too close to me. Could you take a step back?" Remember, boundaries are healthy and you are allowed to set your own. Sexual boundaries. When beginning a new intimate relationship, it's always a good idea to sit down with your partner first so that you can discuss each other's boundaries. This can be a conversation you prompt by saying something like, "I'm looking forward to taking the next step in our relationship, but I would like to take a moment to talk about what that might look like." From there, you can communicate things you are and are not comfortable within a situation. Workplace boundaries. The best way to establish workplace boundaries is to first set the tone in how you conduct yourself professionally. It should reflect the professional manner you hope others will run when engaging with you. From there, setting workplace boundaries is often a matter of waiting until a boundary has been crossed before addressing the situation. For instance, if a colleague talks down to you in a meeting, you can approach them afterward and explain to them why that was unacceptable and when you need that from them in the future. If you have a colleague who routinely violates your work boundaries, don't hesitate to get human resources involved. Regardless of what type of boundaries you are talking about, it's important to keep in mind that healthy boundaries are all about you and the other person in the relationship. It's also important to remember that healthy boundaries take effort and intention to implement and maintain. Healthy boundaries can also prevent relationship abuse by helping individuals understand the difference between what is acceptable and what is not acceptable behavior in different types of relationship. Material boundaries. Let's say you have a camper that a close friend wants to borrow for a trip with their family. You are open to letting them use it, but you also want to make sure they care of it if the way they would. In this case, it's perfectly acceptable to outline your boundaries for care in writing, providing instructions for cleanup and general care. Written instruction placed inside the camper would be simpler for your friend to look back, and they also help make your boundaries very clear. Time boundaries. People tend to fall within two categories regarding time: those who run late to everything, and those who tend to think if you are not early, you are late. If you are the latter, you likely feel as though your boundaries are often intruded on by the former. This is actually a very simple solution to navigate, however. Decide in your mind how long you're willing to wait before an agreed upon meeting time. Give yourself permission to leave or cancel an appointment if that time is not met. If you're dealing with someone who is late, communicate this to them ahead of time. Let them know you will be leaving after a certain amount of time has passed. Still, try not to sound accusatory. Consider acknowledging that you two have different personalities. You are not trying to change them, but you need to set time boundaries for yourself because you can't afford or don't want to wait any longer. Sometimes, no matter how hard you have tried to communicate your boundaries, someone may break them anyway. In that case, know that you are allowed to cut off contact with that person. Anyone who does not respect your boundaries ultimately doesn't respect you. Of course, you have to know your boundaries. It may help to work through the categories, considering interactions that have made you uncomfortable in the past and how establishing boundaries may have helped. The most important thing to remember is that you are allowed to set boundaries and there is no need to feel guilty about it. The world is not a better place when we ignore our own needs for the comfort of others. The people who care about you want to know what you need to feel safe, but they can't help until you know that for yourself and are able and willing to communicate those needs. Feeling like you are responsible for other people's feelings and or happiness. Feeling like you are responsible for fixing or saving others. Touch Emotional or religious boundaries. Spiritual boundaries protect your right to believe in what you want, worship as you wish, and practice your spiritual or religious beliefs. Examples: I'm going to take a moment and say a silent prayer before we eat. Financial and material boundaries. Financial and material boundaries protect your financial resources and possessions. Your right to spend your money as you choose, to not give or loan your money or possessions if you don't want to, and your right to be paid by an employer as agreed.